The year was 1948. World War II had ended, but its shadow remained. The Philippines, recently independent from the United States, faced its own struggles. The Hukbalahap Rebellion, a communist insurgency, challenged the newly formed government. Air travel, once a symbol of progress, was becoming a target. Little did they know the stage was set for the third hijacking, this time in the heart of Southeast Asia. The first two hijackings, though separated by continents, shared a common thread: desperation. The world had entered the jet age, but security measures lagged behind. Airports were largely unsecured and passenger screening was minimal. Governments and airlines scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. The skies, once a symbol of hope, were now a battleground. On July 23, 1948, a routine domestic flight was scheduled to depart from Manila. Philippine Airlines Flight 58, a Douglas DC-3, was bound for Iloilo City. Among the passengers was Juan Posadas, a former soldier entangled in the Hukbalahap Rebellion. Posadas saw the hijacking as his only way out. High above the Philippines, a crisis was about to unfold. The Philippine archipelago, a tapestry of over 7,000 islands, was grappling with newfound independence. The economy, crippled by war, struggled to find its footing. Political factions re-emerged, clashing in the halls of power. The Hukbalahap, a guerrilla movement, transformed into a formidable communist insurgency. The Philippine government struggled to contain the growing insurgency. Juan Posadas, a man hardened by war, found himself drawn into the vortex of rebellion. The Huks offered him a sense of purpose, a chance to fight for a cause he believed in. However, as the government intensified its crackdown, Posadas found himself increasingly isolated. Capture meant certain death, and escape seemed impossible. Desperation pushed him towards a plan that would alter aviation history. The Douglas DC-3 taxied down the runway of Manila's Nielsen Airport. Inside the cramped cabin, passengers settled into their seats, unaware of the storm brewing within their midst. Juan Posadas sat alone, his face betraying no emotion, his eyes scanning the cabin. In his worn leather bag lay a carefully concealed pistol. As the plane climbed higher, Posadas knew there was no turning back. Juan Posadas wasn't born a revolutionary, he was forged into one. Growing up in central Luzon, he learned the value of hard work and community. He joined the Philippine Army, eager to defend his homeland from the Japanese. War stripped away his innocence, replacing it with the harsh realities of survival. Juan, the bright-eyed youth, transformed into a hardened soldier. As the war raged on, Juan's initial fervor waned, replaced by disillusionment. The promises of a swift victory rang hollow as the conflict dragged on. The liberation of the Philippines did little to alleviate Juan's growing despair. Poverty, inequality, and injustice still plagued the land. Juan found himself drawn to the Hukbalahap, their ideals resonating with his own frustration. Juan's skills as a soldier made him a valuable asset to the Hukbalahap. However, the Philippine government launched a massive crackdown on the Huks. The rebels were forced to retreat into the mountains, waging a guerrilla war. Desperation gnawed at Juan, pushing him towards a daring plan. An escape route, not by sea but by air, a hijacking. The air hung heavy with humidity as Juan Posadas made his way through Nielsen Airport. He carried himself with the bearing of a soldier, his face an emotionless mask. His worn leather bag felt unusually heavy, a constant reminder of the dangerous secret it held. As he approached the gate, a wave of doubt washed over him. He joined the queue of passengers, none suspecting the danger that lurked among them. The cabin of the DC-3 exuded an air of nostalgic charm. Juan Posadas chose a seat near the rear, wanting to blend in with the ordinary travelers. The engines roared to life, a tangible reminder of the power that would soon carry them skyward. As the plane taxied towards the runway, Posadas paid little attention to the pre-flight safety instructions. With a final jolt, the DC-3 lifted off, the first act of his desperate plan beginning. The initial tension of takeoff gave way to a sense of normalcy as Flight 58 reached cruising altitude. Juan Posadas, however, felt none of the tranquility that enveloped his fellow passengers. He sat rigidly in his seat, his senses on high alert. It was time. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. "This is a hijacking," he announced, his voice cutting through the air like a shard of glass. Silence descended upon the cabin, heavy and suffocating. The passengers of Flight 58, their faces pale with shock and disbelief, sat frozen in their seats. The cheerful chatter that had filled the air just moments before was replaced by a chilling quiet, broken only by the hum of the engines and the frantic thumping of hearts. Juan Posadas, his hand trembling slightly around the grip of the pistol, surveyed the scene with a mix of fear and determination. He had anticipated resistance, perhaps even panic, but the sheer terror that emanated from the passengers caught him off guard. Their eyes, wide with a primal fear, followed his every move, reflecting the gravity of the situation. A young mother, her face ashen, clutched her child tightly to her chest, stifling a sob. A businessman, his briefcase lying open and forgotten at his feet, stared straight ahead, his face a mask of disbelief. An elderly woman, her lips moving in silent prayer, reached for her rosary beads. Posadas, his heart pounding in his chest, raised his voice, his tone sharp, commanding. "Everyone remain calm," he ordered, his words echoing in the stillness. "Follow my instructions and no one will get hurt." The words sounded hollow even to his own ears, a flimsy reassurance in the face of such palpable terror. The initial shock began to give way to a wave of hushed whispers, ripples of fear spreading through the cabin like a virus. Passengers exchanged anxious glances, their eyes conveying a mixture of confusion, fear, and desperate hope. The air grew thick with tension, a palpable entity that pressed down on them, stealing the breath from their lungs. A young couple, their honeymoon trip now transformed into a nightmare, huddled together, their hands intertwined, seeking comfort in their shared fear. An off-duty soldier, his military training kicking in, discreetly scanned the cabin, assessing the situation, his hand hovering near his side, instinctively reaching for a weapon he no longer possessed. The stewardess, her face pale but composed, moved down the aisle, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes pleading with the passengers to remain calm. She had faced her share of turbulence and unruly passengers, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this, for the chilling reality of a gun-wielding hijacker holding their lives in his hands. "Please, everyone," she implored, her voice barely a whisper, "just do as he says, we'll be all right." Her words, though laced with uncertainty, seemed to offer a sliver of hope in the darkness, a fragile thread to cling to in the face of the unknown. In the cramped cockpit, Captain Ricardo Diaz struggled to maintain his composure. His hands trembled slightly on the controls as the reality sank in. He had faced engine trouble, storms, even near misses, but never a threat like this. His co-pilot, Miguel Santos, stared at the intercom, his mind racing. The hijacker's demands were relayed in a calm, detached tone. Hong Kong, an impossible demand, a suicide mission. Diaz, his voice steady, addressed his co-pilot. "We need to buy time, Miguel," he said, firm and resolute. "Contact Manila Control. Keep it calm." Santos, his training kicking in, reached for the radio. Their routine flight had transformed into a high-stakes negotiation. The Douglas DC-3, its once familiar engine hum now a menacing drone, began its descent. The change in altitude sent a fresh wave of fear through the cabin. Juan Posadas, gripping his pistol, felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The weight of his actions was starting to crush him. He had crossed a point of no return, his future uncertain. The faces of the passengers mirrored his own growing terror. The stewardess, remarkably composed, urged everyone to remain calm. As the plane descended, the ground became visible, a patchwork of green fields and villages. Posadas felt a surge of both hope and dread. The wheels of the DC-3 screeched as they made contact with the runway. The plane taxied towards a small group of figures, government officials, negotiators, and soldiers. Inside the cabin, a collective sigh of relief swept through the passengers. The landing, though rough, signified a reprieve from their ordeal. However, the presence of armed soldiers injected fresh uncertainty. Juan Posadas felt his plans slipping away. He had underestimated the resolve of the authorities. The world outside the plane was closing in. The stewardess relayed instructions from the cockpit. "Everyone please remain seated and calm," she announced. "Negotiators are here to help." Her words offered a glimmer of hope. A tense silence settled upon the airfield as the negotiators approached the plane. They carried no weapons, their hands held open in a gesture of peace. Juan Posadas, his finger on the trigger, watched with distrust and desperation. Colonel Ramon Garcia, his voice calm, spoke through a loudspeaker. "Juan Posadas, we know who you are. We understand your situation. We are here to help." Garcia outlined the terms safe passage, a fair trial. The offer rang hollow in Posadas' ears. He knew surrender meant certain death. Inside the DC-3, the hopes of the passengers began to dwindle. Their fate rested in the hands of a desperate man. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar of engines, more profound than any terrified scream. On that remote airfield, under a sky that seemed to hold its breath, the world tilted on its axis. Juan Posadas, the desperate man who had held a plane hostage, a nation captive, and a future uncertain, was gone. The gunshot, a single sharp crack that echoed across the rice paddies, it was the final punctuation mark on his desperate act. Inside the plane, where hope had flickered and waned, a different kind of silence descended. It was the silence of shock, of disbelief, of a sudden jarring release from terror. Passengers, still clutching loved ones, still frozen in postures of fear, slowly began to comprehend. Outside, Colonel Garcia, his face etched with the weight of responsibility, lowered the loudspeaker. He had offered peace, a chance at redemption, but some wounds even time cannot heal. The armed soldiers, their faces grim, moved towards the plane, their steps measured, their movements practiced, but the battle was over before it began. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the airfield, the passengers of Flight 58 emerged, blinking in the fading light, each step a victory march, each breath a testament to survival. They had journeyed to the brink of despair and back, forever bound by the shared experience, their lives forever marked by the shadow of Flight 58. The hijacking of Philippine Airlines Flight 58, the third such incident in recorded history, sent shockwaves far beyond the Philippines. The world, still reeling from World War II, faced a new form of terror exploiting aviation technology. The media descended upon the story, eager to unravel the hijackers' motivations and dissect the events above the Philippines. Juan Posadas, a desperate soldier turned outlaw, symbolized post-war anxieties. The disillusionment and instability of the era were palpable, but beyond the headlines, Flight 58's legacy was one of resilience, courage in the face of fear, and the enduring human spirit. In the decades that followed, the world witnessed countless acts of air piracy, each incident a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities of air travel. The motivations of the hijackers varied: political extremism, religious fanaticism, personal vendettas, but the impact remained the same. Shattered lives, heightened security, and a pervasive sense of fear cast a long shadow over air travel. The events of September 11, 2001 marked a turning point. The hijacking of 4 commercial airliners underscored the need for constant vigilance. The skies, once a symbol of freedom, became a battleground in the war on terror. Airports transformed into fortresses, passengers subject to intrusive security measures. Yet amidst the heightened security, the human spirit endures. People continue to fly, their desire to connect and explore undeterred. The skies, though forever changed, remain a testament to human ingenuity and our unyielding desire to push boundaries.